Well, hello there, and welcome to How to Gather and Mine Digital Body Language Across the Webinar Lifecycle Before, During, and After. You're in the right place for that, and my name is Mike Agron. I'm one of the co-founders and executive webinar producer for WebAttract, and I'll be one of your host and moderator for today's webinar. We're very excited to have you here. We've got a lot of great information to cover. And to get started, when you think about content marketing, such as the webinar, it really has become an invaluable tool in the buyer's market. It's just a wonderful way to communicate to an audience and get information back from an audience to help convert them as prospects to becoming your customers. And really, that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how do you do that? And in just a moment, I'm going to introduce our panel, who are colleagues of mine and partners of mine who are experts along the demand generation cycle, who have a particular portion of expertise to bring on how to convert prospects to customers. So to get started, what we want to cover is this topic of digital body language. And it's a fascinating opportunity to work in a virtual environment and capture information and use it to mine and to take action with. And what we're going to do is we'll talk and give you some tips and insights and best practices. And we're going to do it more in a conversation than one slide after another. We want you to join the conversation, and we're going to be having a conversation. And really what this is about is how do you ensure that you have predictable outcomes from your events, whether it's a webinar, a podcast, or whatever. And again, how can we take this digital information and use it to convert more prospects into customers? And then we're going to leave some time at the end for you to ask us questions at our Ask the Experts panel. So to get started, I'd like to launch two polls. The first one is, and I'm going to bring it up right now, we'd like to know what type of digital body language you currently use to measure your webinar effectiveness. Is it none? Do you look at the number of people who register or attend? Is it the quantity of fresh new sales prospects, or the number of new social media blog followers, or is it closed deals? If you go ahead and vote on that, we'd love to get some feedback, and we'll talk about that. And then while you're doing that, let me start the audience voting right now. Hold on. Okay. All right. We've got some votes coming in. Go ahead and continue sending your votes in, and then we'll take a look at the results and see as a percentage what the audience does. And I'm going to go ahead and let's take a look at the results. So right now, many of you out there are not doing anything. Okay. Well, that's good. Now let's take a look at, well, actually I shouldn't say that. We had some more votes come in. So half of you are talking about the quantity of fresh new sales prospects. All right. Let's go back. And the next one we want to know is what type of system or platform do you use to track and analyze lifecycle intelligence? Again, if you're not using anything, let us know. Are you using standard reports from your webinar provider? Do you have a homegrown or customized system? Or are you working with a marketing or sales automation provider? Let us know what you have. And after we get some votes in, we've got some more votes coming in, we'll go ahead and we'll view the results. And we'll see where the audience is on this. And let's take a look right now. Okay. So a third of you aren't using any platform. A third are using standard reports from your webinar provider, and a third are using a homegrown or customized system. Thank you so much. And I want to get back to the next slide. And so let's start with looking at the webinar as an event. And it's actually a mini theatrical event. Usually from the time you start, you have 6 to 8 weeks to go from the first act, which is planning, the second act, recruiting your audience, the third act, and shaping your messaging, the fourth act, and going live, and the fifth act, post-webinar. But what's wonderful about a webinar, as an example, as a virtual event, is that it gives you an opportunity to gather and collect a lot of life cycle intelligence, and that's what we're going to talk about today. before the event, during the webinar, and after the webinar. What's important in doing this, though, to take advantage of what you're going to hear from each of us, is that it all starts with a plan. Understanding what your objectives are for the webinar, what is the value the audience will get, how are you going to define your success factors? Is it the number of leads, the number of prospects? Is it the number of deals you close? And what's your call to action, both from your call to action to follow up and what do you want the audience to do? What do you want them to do for the next steps? And then, of course, analyzing the life cycle intelligence. And all of this helps maximize and ensure that you have predictable outcomes. So let's get right to our panel. I'm going to make a brief introduction of each of them, and then we're going to jump into some of the topics. First person that I have up that you can see next to me is Kevin Miller. And Kevin is the Chief Marketing Officer for Sales Fusion, someone who is my guru, my go-to person for anything to do with email marketing or sales automation. Hi, Kevin. How you doing?
Good, Mike. How about yourself?
Good, good. Let me bring on Kim and Tom, and then we'll get the conversation going. Next to Kevin is Kim Lloyd, who's the CEO of Rock the Deadline, which is a very interesting offering for content marketing and social media. And she'll be talking about that in just a moment. Hi, Kim. How are you?
Hi, Mike.
Good. And last but not least is Tom Judge, who's the Vice President of Strategy at Direct Marketing Partners, an organization that works to add the human touch for lead nurturing campaigns. Hi, Tom. How's it going?
Fine. Thank you, Mike.
Good. Well, Tom, as long as I'm with you, why don't you just take a moment, tell us a little bit about what direct marketing, what you do in the value chain for demand generation, and how you would define digital body language, and then we're going to move that up and jump into a slide here.
Okay. Well, in a nutshell, what we are is a multi-channel, multi-touch contact center. So what you would call us is a web-enabled and highly trained pre-sales teams, and we support clients by receiving their various marketing automation feeds, their various other touch points that may be online or offline, and synthesizing them together and engaging with prospects in the pre-sale environment in order to get them further profiled beyond what perhaps has come in so far and move them to sales-ready condition. And that's what we do.
Got it. Kim, a little bit about you and Rock the Deadline.
Yes. So Rock the Deadline is a company, and our goal is to really help you blow out the top of the sales funnel using content marketing and really equipping you companies to do content marketing for both B2B and B2C. We can either help yourself through our software or augment your digital content creation needs of blogs, articles, and social media posts with our own network of writers and editors, and hence why we partnered with you, Mike, since you're in the same zone. So, and for me, digital body language really is about how Web 2.0 really gave us the opportunity to talk as marketers back to our audience via social media, via commenting, via telling how they clicked, tracking, all that kind of fun stuff. So there's so many different mechanisms for getting that digital feedback that we never had as marketers before. So that's really what digital body language is reading that information and getting a deeper understanding of your audiences.
Thanks, Kim. Kev, tell us about you and Sales Fusion, and then we'll jump into the first slide.
Yeah, sounds good. So Sales Fusion is a technology enablement platform or a marketing automation platform. Our customers are typically using us to build, track, and manage all of their outbound and inbound demand generation campaigns. A big part of the digital body language is capturing the behavior that people have once they interact with us on our website. So we look at the behavior of people who come to our website using lead scoring and recency modeling to try to identify those prospects who are sales ready and then move them into the CRM system if there's one in place, and those that aren't sales ready to retain them in the marketing side, and perhaps enroll them in very targeted, personalized, content-specific nurture marketing campaigns. So we're a SaaS app, we're a software application, and we're typically used by a B2B marketer to do everything and anything under the sun related to demand generation.
And I think it's safe to say with all of us that, as I mentioned earlier, it's really all about helping clients convert more prospects to customers. We come at it a little bit differently, but there's a common linkage to working across the value chain. So let's jump into the before portion of what we can do with digital body language. And Kevin, I've got this slide up here on the B2B website funnel. Why don't you start the conversation about what you're able to do going across the various portions here?
Well, yeah, and we look at our website today as a direct extension of our sales force. I mean, as marketers over the last 10 years, a big focus of what we do is to get people into our website. Whether we're doing that through PPC or online ads or even social, we want people on our website. Our website is a selling entity within our organization. So it stands to reason that if we're spending a lot of our budget on getting people to our website, that we should understand what people are doing when they come to our website. So this funnel is really meant to place code on a website that allows us to track and place a cookie and identify an individual when they come to our site, and then follow them as they either go deep into our site, understand what content they're downloading, what they're looking at, and then also look for them to have return visits and deep visits to our site. And those things are very valuable. So this whole notion of a funnel is to really kind of build out a traditional sales funnel, but from a marketer's perspective, to capture as many people at the high end, do a little bit of filtering to understand, who needs to go where, a little traffic cop action where we basically say, if you come to our site more than 5 times in a week and you access 5 white papers, we're going to score you very high, and we're going to slot you over into the sales team and let sales engage with you directly. And then those that quite don't make the cut yet, those that are having more casual browsing sessions, if we do identify those people, we're going to put them in the nurture marketing campaigns. I think the interesting thing to point out is that with all the technology, with all the metrics, with all the tools that are at our disposal today, our end goal is still to put a prospect in front of a live salesperson. So I think what this technology is really doing is it's helping marketing, rather than just throw a spreadsheet across the fence and hope for the best. It's allowing us to do some intelligent analysis of people coming into our website, funnel them down in a way that we can put the best leads in sales hands, and then foster a better working relationship between marketing and sales. So that's really what it's all about, Mike.
It's still that face-to-face contact that we're looking for.
Correct.
So Kim, thanks, Kevin. So Kim, if we look at this and we talk about tracking behavior and presenting new content through channels, that would seem to lead towards a conversation on how we can use social media and blogging before the webinar to capture information, not only to drive registration, but to get information. Can you give us some ideas on what that would look like?
Yeah, definitely. So just like you did polls in the very beginning of this webinar, you can actually do those polls through social media channels and on your website prior to the webinar to help you kind of fine-tune what topics you'll be presenting on the webinar. So you can do things like throw out in LinkedIn, depending on if your audiences have their characteristics are to use LinkedIn primarily, then you'll want to use maybe LinkedIn to do those polls. If they're Facebook users mainly, then you'll want to use your Facebook page or a combination of both to do, polls, do conversation starters, see how many people comment and chime in with their own point of view, leading questions that really get them to talk about some of the topics you'll ultimately be covering on the webinar, and then later within the threaded comments for those polls or those conversation starters, insert, oh, by the way, we'll be talking about this more in our upcoming webinar. So if your conversations online meet with dead air, you might want to rethink what you're going to be covering in the webinar.
How much in advance of the webinar would you suggest doing this?
I would definitely say as soon as you start marketing the webinar, at least once every few days, I would put a leading question or conversation starter or poll out there.
Okay. Well, we're going to move into lead scoring and nurturing and engaging sales, and really that's going to have you up on the next topic, Tom. But Kevin, anything you want to cover off on this before we go to Tom?
No, that makes perfect sense. And a lot of times on the email side of the fence, when we're trying to drive people to that registration form or to the website in advance of a webinar, oftentimes what we're doing is when we capture information, let's say from a form in advance of the webinar, we may have a few questions in there and look at how somebody maybe answered a question and then drip a few emails out to the people with some additional content, like you answered this way on this particular question. We want to let you know that we're going to be addressing that through this in the webinar. So you could definitely react to some of the information that you gather before the webinar, either from the email click-throughs or the landing pages or the web activities, and certainly use that to entice people to show up.
Great. Thanks. So, Tom, you always bring a sense of humor to our conversations. Why don't you take a moment and talk a little bit about how you map the end process, and then let's define what a sales-ready lead is, and we'll get into the next section.
Right. So I'm just having a little bit of fun with this because when I do my workshops, I talk about mapping the end-to-end process, and people end up with 2 or 3 or a multitude of different funnel mapping and so on and so forth. So this is just kind of a culmination of that to have fun. But this represents one of the biggest failure points that I see when I have to go in and do a diagnostic on why is somebody not hitting their revenue numbers. And so make a long story short, Mike, you wanted me to point out some of the key tips because we only have but moments of these folks' time, and that is start with the buying process, folks, and map it. And it'll be you're going to end up. The outcome of this is you're going to end up with a series of drawings or sketches, or some people I know like the whiteboard, or they can formalize it into different spreadsheets or PowerPoints. But know the buying process. Start there, which is going to lead us momentarily to, what is a sales-ready lead? Because we just mapped the buying process, and at a certain point in time, as Kevin points out, we've got to quantify how many go into sales-ready condition. How many do we have to generate that in order to hit this conversion rate? So we're trying to drive sales quota. So doing that, we've developed a more copious, detailed set of metrics. So you develop those, but the starting point on a lot of the metrics is what is sales ready that can be handed off with a high degree of confidence that warrants the actual sales channel or sales rep, whether it be an inside salesperson or an outside salesperson, that really warrants their time. Now, what we're seeing, the trend is, as technology becomes more pervasive in solution selling, is that you've got to hand off a higher degree of sales readiness. Because why? Sales forces are squeezed, marketing budgets are squeezed, so we've got to nurture them to a higher degree. So these are general categories of defining a sales ready that you can go through, and I would say category. These are not individual questions, but these represent categories that you might go through. And I want to emphasize the word plus on this because in addition to the general category, you've got to get down to the nitty-gritty to get people to actually answer their particular qualification question. Because the big challenge I see is the lack of numbers graduating from the various touch points in the funnel into the sales-ready category. It's horrific. I see these numbers every day because we help customers manage their leads. They're doing all this top-end activity, but it's getting it across the line. So what we see is if you've got to have an interactive way with both online and offline and human touch and automation touches to justify them to give you this level of information and make sure that your data is clean. And the big thing is, are they willing to move to the next step in the sales process? You have all these things together, you'll have a higher revenue close rate from your sales leads.
And I think it's safe to say, the acronym here is BANT, for budget, authority, need, and time frame. This really goes back to the planning process of your webinar. It goes back to mapping out their buying process. So all of these things fit in as far as being able to segment your leads when you get them, that how many of these fall into these buckets here. Let me give you one one more tip before we go to the during. Something that we find is extremely helpful if you're doing a webinar. On the registration landing page, and Kevin has taught me this many times over, you want to get enough information from people just to start a conversation. You want to be non-invasive. You don't want to ask a lot of probing questions that look like you're trying to close them or sell them. However, if you ask them, what would you like to learn from this webinar? I will promise you will learn an awful lot of insight on what is important to them. And this is probably one of the biggest forms of digital body language that you can get back, because you never have a chance to meet your audience before the webinar. Now's your opportunity. What do you want to learn? And you know what? 85-90% of the people will give you honest information, and those are the people that you really want. You want people who want to learn and want to get something. So this is an important tip. Kevin, anything you want to say on email marketing and collecting information?
Well, you're going to get some valuable information just from the raw metrics alone. What I always tell people relative to a webinar around email marketing is you have to be very persistent and consistent. If you're going after, 50,000 people to try and get them to show up to a webinar, a very small percentage are going to see your first email. So you need to leverage things like drip-based marketing, subject swapping techniques, varying the times and days and subject lines to elicit the highest level of open rates. I mean, that's a tip that I can give. Mike, that's a tip I've given you many times over. And I would stick by that as a quality best practice.
Yeah, it works. And from a digital body language standpoint, I think, another way of looking at this is if we're going to push out 50,000 emails, we're only going to get maybe 7-8% of them to be open. So that feedback tells us that 92% of the people that received this didn't get it the first time. So we need to come back and give them some more information. So during the webinar, which is where we are right now, there's a couple things that are very, very helpful to give you real-time feedback, and that's doing online polls, just as we did. And the reason is it measures two things. One, what's the level of engagement that you have from your audience? The more votes you have, the more people are engaged. And two, it gives you valuable feedback that you could not get any other way. And here's a real example. This was a question that was asked at the end of a webinar we did, and the question was, how will you monitor your online reputation going forward? 66% of the audience participated. 21% said, I'm not sure, but I would like help. Well, guess what? They just invited you to follow up and give them a call. So in real time, on the spot, 21% of this audience said, I would like help. You have a level of interest there that they'll be open to hearing from you. And then, of course, the breakdown for the others. Another technique during the webinar is using an exit survey. It really provides a lot of valuable digital feedback in the sense that you can ask people. People like to weigh in. That's another benefit of polls and surveys. How did today's webinar meet your expectations? You measure two things from a digital body language. How many people responded? And how did they evaluate the information? That affects your brand, your reputation, your interest to follow up. Typical response rates are 25 to 45%. If you're in that area, you had a pretty good webinar, pretty good engagement. Again, what people evaluate, you want to see 80% of threes that met or above or exceeded. All of this is very, very valuable information, and you capture it after the webinar and use it, and we'll show you how to do that. Now let's move into the after part, where there's quite a bit to talk about as far as driving engagement. And one of the things that always comes up is, do you tweet or not to tweet? And Kim, since this is your wheelhouse, why don't you take a moment and talk about how you would use tweeting and Twitter for this portion after the webinar. What are some things that you would recommend doing?
So I would definitely try to come up with a hashtag for your event that you market before the webinar, during the webinar, and then remind people that hashtag after the webinar so that the conversation can continue with amongst the people that attended the webinar, and so they kind of feel a kinship and they can still get more questions answered after the webinar is done. So that's always a good thing. But the other thing you need to take into account is even though you may get non-tweeters to actually tweet around the webinar, you have to recognize whether that's a good ongoing tactic or not, because some, for B2C, it definitely is, because a lot of people are tweeting B2C type of activities, whereas B2B, sometimes it's not as strong, so probably going a little bit against the grain here, but it is difficult to really get the attention of business people through Twitter, just because they're going to be looking at their email probably more than TweetDeck. Whereas B2C, you get a lot more conversation going that way, a lot more real-time social media. So just understand your audience before you pour a lot into content marketing after the fact, after the webinar, to continuously promote that content.
Yeah, I like what you said, and that's a very valid point, that actually having that hashtag is another way to have the conversation going during the webinar. And, it's interesting. Sometimes we will get quite a bit of feedback on it. And, again, it's allowing people to weigh in on the conversation. But the one question that perhaps you could put a fine point on, when you say you have to judge when you're going to tweet, what type of information will a B2B audience embrace? What is the kind of information that makes it worth your while, so it doesn't come across as gratuitous? Can you give us an idea or an example?
Yeah, they really do like thought leadership type of tweets. They appreciate things that are going to make them look good if they retweet it. So if you can do that, that's more of the mindset of the B2B tweeter.
Terrific. Okay, so our webinar was a success. We met our registration and attendance goals, but now the real thing and the real objective is to put our sales and marketing hat on, and how do we maximize post-webinar all of this wonderful information we've collected? Well, there's a couple things that are must-haves. One is to archive a copy of the recorded webinar. We know that a lot of people registered for today's webinar. The real world got in the way. They weren't able to participate live, but this webinar will be available as an on-demand recording. And then within 24 to 48 hours is to have that warm touch from a person go out to everybody who either registered or didn't attend or attended, and follow up, as Kim was saying, with some valuable information. It's a great way to keep that touch going and to have that digital body language continue. And then really what you want to do is take all of the data that you've collected and begin to analyze it and figure out how you're going to follow up on that. And we're going to get to that. And that's all about paying attention to trends. And one of the things, again, that I just have found to be absolutely more beneficial than anything is all of the information that you can collect in a webinar. It's unlike almost any other activity I've done. And, Kim had mentioned earlier that there's an alignment between what we do and what content marketing does. And I would have to say that a webinar breathes life into content, makes it come to a level of engagement that's difficult to get from a white paper or report. They're important, but the webinar helps connect with people. But you can also learn about, as we're showing you here, what kind of industries were represented on the webinar. This one was for a highly technical audience, and you can see the breakdown of we had system integrators, we had mobile device manufacturers, and then we asked them during the registration, what kind of inertial technology are you most interested in? You get an interesting breakdown. This is all very, very valuable feedback. And then studying the insights from the attendees. I'm not going to go through each one of these items here, but this is just kind of a snapshot where if you go to the extreme left on the column where it says interest, we asked people what particular technology interest did you have. The next one was pretty eye-opening. Are you planning to purchase this year? One person in this particular sample said, not sure, they're just researching. The other one said yes. One that said yes, that would come pretty close to being a sales-ready lead if you asked me. So we're gonna put that in a different bucket. But it also asks, what would you like to learn? How did you evaluate today? What else would you like? The point being, all of this here allows you to have a much more warm conversation after the webinar with your prospect. And Tom, I know that in your follow-up that you use this kind of information. Can you just give us an example of how you use it?
Absolutely. This is where we take the numbers, if you will, and really put them on steroids. What we've learned is in the multi-contact center, we're receiving feeds from, as I said before, the marketing automation email stream, from the social stream, and from the webinar stream. They're coming into a highly trained group of people, and what we've done is we've seen a certain level of engagement via the emails and so on and so forth. But again, we're keeping an eye over on the metrics, and that's when we really have to put on the afterburners to help achieve those lead quota goals. And so what we're doing is we're interjecting trained people with this level of information into follow-up call and email streams, the nurture process, and the numbers are quadrupled. And that's fantastic, because a lot of times it pulls out, the lead goal at the end of it, because we've added that human touch and the insight and the ability to have a peer-to-peer level conversation. Not only how did you answer this, or you didn't answer that question, or tell me more about the MIMS project you do have going, and the other qualifying questions. You've just earned the right to ask those. So that's how we use this.
Yep, and again, this is all based on digital body language. This is all based upon information. We've never met the person yet, but we're getting all this information from her or from him. Fabulous. And then we're going to walk into the next portion on this, and you hit on it, and how we can capture this information at our website and do even more follow-up. But again, the objective here is to continue to mine this life cycle intelligence, whether it's social media, whether it's the profiling you did before the event, the polls during the event, the surveys and the on-demand recordings after the event. Because after the event, for instance, on the on-demand recordings, you can tell if somebody viewed it, did they attend, and want to see it again? Did they register but weren't able to attend, or are they a fresh new lead? Just fabulous amounts of information. Here's what I think gets extremely interesting with a lot of this information, and how we can take visitors to our website and make some sense out of it. So, Kevin, let me come back to this, and then we'll have Kim and Tom join in, and we'll start answering some questions. So go ahead, Kevin, if you don't mind walking us through this slide here and what this all means.
Well, what it all means is, again, it comes back to that whole notion of your website as a funnel. So with respect to a webinar, all right, you really have three pieces of content. You have the live webinar, you have the slides, which are then converted into something like SlideShare, PDF, and loaded onto your site. You then have the on-demand webinar, which can be loaded into YouTube and then embedded on your site, etc. So you have these three pieces of content that are going to be part of your website now. And then there's a whole series of communications going out to three groups of people. I've referred to it in the past as a 3x3. So you've got those three pieces of content that you're hitting three groups of people with, and then you're going to start to measure what they're doing. So, for example, we may look at those that registered but did not attend are going to get a series of emails that send them out and say, here's the on-demand webinar. Come into the website and take a look at it. And then we're going to look and see if they come into the webinar, and if they do register and they do look at that, we may send them another email, trigger off another email that says, well, thanks, we appreciate that, we know you're busy. Here's a listing of our prior on-demand webinars that you might want to take a look at. And then we measure whether or not they look at those. So we're starting to then look at the depth of the interactions that these people are having post-webinar. And this goes out literally for several weeks following an event. And all along the way, we're looking to see what people are doing, which assets they're accessing, and then we're, of course, kicking in the lead scoring and then intervening with sales at the appropriate time. But I'll echo your comments that, a webinar is a 6 to 8 week nurture campaign in and of itself that, it's just, it really, you almost have a relationship with the prospect before your salesperson ever talks to them. And it makes it a very easy interaction after that fact. But we put the slides on the website. I personally load slides into a SlideShare type application. or I will put them up there in a PDF behind a form, and I'll drive people to that on the site in a resource center. I'll have a video embedded on the site, or I'll direct them to a place like a Bright Talk where we know that it's recorded, and then we could drive them to that. And then, it goes back to the old thing. We watch, we measure, we react, and then we intervene.
Yeah, it's pretty scientific the way you've described it there. And so, Kim, from a social media blogging standpoint, what are some things to keep the conversation going and being able to get those people to come back to your website, to your blog?
So I think that there are so many webinars are so topic rich, and when you think about how many topics you cover in any given webinar, each one of those can be broken out into its own digestible piece of content that you could use to write a blog post about or an article series about, and then be able to follow up with social media to let them know, hey, just posted this topic that we did cover in our webinar, but we went into a little bit more depth, and here's the topic kind of blown out, and so you can build almost an editorial calendar. And what I mean by an editorial calendar, a 30, 60-day regular topic stream of subtopics from your webinar as blog posts, as articles, and then use social media to drive them to that article or blog post. And within those article and blog posts, definitely link to your webinar. Search engines love on-site links where you're linking to strong pieces of content within your own website. So that helps you with your SEO too. So it's definitely a great thing to not just take a webinar and you definitely have to have it as one big chunk, but think about breaking it up and really using it to help drive some more extensive content marketing efforts.
Thank you. Well, we've got some questions here, and I know we're running close to our welcome limit. I'm going to try and get one in for each of you. So, Kevin, we've talked about during the registration process about, you mentioned before about not everybody's going to open and click. What are some good tips that you would give to maximize open and clicks for driving registration?
On the maximizing of the opens, you have to do subject swapping and time variables. So you send a main email out to 50,000 people and it says, hi, join us for this webinar. You want to wait at least 24, maybe 48 hours and try all the non-responders, those that did not open. Try them at a different time of day. So if your first one goes out at 11 a.m. Eastern time, you want to hit that second group at about the 3 p.m. Eastern time. You want to try different days of the week. The generally accepted best practice has always been Tuesday to Thursday, 2 p.m. But you should vary that. I mean, in today's world, people are checking emails around the clock. We've experimented with the Sunday morning email, catch those workaholics on the Sunday mornings when they're quiet and they're looking at their email, and we get interesting responses from that. So vary the times, repeatedly hit the non-responders, at least over a course of 2 weeks leading up to the event, and you'll double and oftentimes triple your open rates and hence your click-through rates to the form.
Thanks, Kevin. Tom, here's a question. How soon after the event should you follow up and engage prospects? What's your best practice on that?
Well, what we find is the best is take a look at the metrics and the digital dialogue captured and prioritize them and get on them immediately. If you go too soon, it can creep people out. At the same token, we suggest an immediate email. And what we found is the best conversion rate to sales ready is depending on their language, prioritize a phone call to engage them in that content. And as Kim was saying, know and be aware of that series of content in a calendar plan, because if they won't answer questions at this stage, put them on a track for that and ask them what suits them best. Also, by following up the sooner, it's fresher in their mind, and there's an implication we find. When we follow up in person, there's this almost implied, oh, gee, I got this, that, and the other thing from your event. Thanks for asking. Now they feel a little bit indebted to you. So it's the old quid quo pro. You know, we've served you up some information. Maybe you can help us understand your needs better. We can get into those hard-to-answer questions. And so that's what we see, and that's what really drives the numbers.
Okay. Well, I think, you know, in all of this, the takeaway is that this harvest, or the ability to harvest all this information, only comes from planning. And that planning is the best roadmap to ensure that you're going to have a predictable and positive outcome. And assess what you're going to use to capture your digital body language. We've talked about a lot of different tools. We've talked about the webinar itself. We've talked about email marketing. We've talked about social media and blogging and after the fact. And being able to use life cycle intelligence to segment sales ready versus nurturing opportunities, because not everybody who attends your webinar is ready to buy. They just may be on to become interested or learn more about what you can do to help them. So some of them are going to need more nurturing. Some of them are going to be ready to be turned over to sales. And being able to build an ongoing database to create your own digital body language benchmarks, something that we do all the time to make sure that we understand our audiences, what's working. When I gave those numbers on engagement, we've tracked hundreds of webinars, and we know where the engagement levels should be and what the numbers should be, and they're very helpful to know if you're on track. We've got a couple more questions, but we do want to invite all of you to feel free to contact any of us. Our information is up on the slide there. Mike Agron at WebAttract, Kevin Miller from Sales Fusion, Kim Lloyd at Rock the Deadline, or Tom Judge at Direct Marketing Partners. We're all available to chat with you about your particular needs. And a couple other questions have popped up. Let me ask you this, Kim. This is an interesting question here. Before the webinar, are there any tools that you would describe as being useful to better help understand your audience?
Yeah, I think that some of the tools to help better understand your audience would definitely be LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn is a very powerful, research tool. I think that there's a lot of user groups that are out there. So if you think that you're targeting a specific segment of people in the legal profession, find the user group out there and just monitor that conversation and see what they're talking about. It's hard to, at the very last minute, all of a sudden pretend you're an integral part of an online LinkedIn group. So if you're doing it too close to your webinar and trying to indoctrinate yourself into that online community, it's going to be probably a little bit too little too late. But you could at least go back through the discussions and see what people have been talking about and what got the most activity, and that'll really help you understand what's top of mind.
Well, speaking of that on social media and tools to understand your audience, Kevin, here's a question on if you could just take a moment. What do you think is the future of email marketing using the context of social media marketing? Could you give us your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's like asking what's the future of email marketing with respect to radio advertising or television. It's a medium. And I think what's changing about email marketing is that the messaging style is what's changing. We really are trying to move people away from the spray and pray methodology of blasting your entire house file once a month and hoping for the best. We want to get much more specific. We want to be much more content-oriented, nurture-oriented, and reactive in our email campaign. And our email campaign should be part of a multi-channel campaign that includes social media as well as traditional email marketing and traditional online advertising. So I know the question often comes, up, and it's a fun thing to blog about. Has social killed email? Has social killed this? Has social killed that? And I always firmly state no, it has not. It's opened up a new channel and a new way to engage with prospects, but we still need effective email marketing to go out and reach people who we're not connected with.
And I would say as a segue, Tom, to you, not only do we need email marketing, but we still need the human touch. And I know that's so much of what you focus on is taking all of this information and actually reaching out to talk to people to get them into a conversation. So I want to thank you for being on today's webinar, Tom. I got about 10 seconds before I wrap up. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I would just say that every time a new channel comes out, and social is the latest, and there's going to be more in the future, we bring them into the contact center, and we just leverage them and rock those numbers by using the multi-channel concept.
Great. Well, Kevin and Kim and Tom, I want to thank each of you. I don't know when 45 minutes has flown by so quickly. I know we're just getting started. We got a lot of great questions, and there's a lot more we could talk about, and hopefully we can be invited back to do a follow-on session to this. But I really want to thank all of you for being part of today's conversation. And for those of you in the audience, thank you so much for joining us. And you've got all the information on the screen in front of you if you want to continue the conversation. We really appreciate your time and your attention and your interest. And have a great rest of the week. And this is Mike Agron for WebAttract on behalf of our panel, thanking you all, and we'll talk with you soon. Bye for now.